Let me share a principle that has protected me from serious financial trouble more than once, not because it filled me with hope, but because it kept me grounded in reality. Too many of us drive through life staring in the rear view mirror. We look at the past few decades of globalization, relative peace, and tame inflation and quietly assume the road ahead will stay just as smooth. But history doesn't repeat in straight lines, it moves in cycles. And every few generations, those cycles line up in ways that change everything. I call this rare alignment the Great Convergence. A moment when the biggest forces shaping the world stop canceling each other out and start amplifying one another. When that happens, systems grow fragile, and change speeds up dramatically. These forces aren't vague theories, they're measurable and already in motion. First, debt. The leading global power, the United States, has borrowed heavily for decades, leaving far less room to maneuver in a crisis. Second, internal division. America today is more deeply polarized than at any point in living memory, eroding the trust and shared purpose that hold a society together. Third, external rivalry. A rising power. China is actively challenging the rules-based international order that has governed trade, security, and diplomacy since World War II. Fourth, nature itself. Climate shifts and pandemics have moved from distant threats to ongoing tests of our economic and political resilience, reminders that environmental limits can reshape power faster than any treaty. Fifth, technology. Artificial intelligence is transforming productivity, warfare, and influence at a pace our institutions were never designed to handle. When these five forces converge, old certainties break down. Investments that once seemed rock solid can suddenly falter. Alliances that felt permanent grow shaky. Institutions built for a slower era struggle to respond. We're already living in that transition. The American-led order that took shape after 1945 is visibly straining, while whatever comes next hasn't yet settled into a clear, stable form. This decade will largely decide what replaces it. Looking at history this way doesn't point to one inevitable future. It reveals a range of possibilities. Understanding those paths isn't about feeding fear. It's about giving yourself the clarity to prepare. Because only when you see the full spectrum of what could happen can you position yourself wisely for what probably will. Before we dive into those possible futures, it's essential to grasp the real constraints shaping this rivalry. In any great power dynamic, there are key players and unbreakable rules. The main players today are the United States and China. But the rules aren't dictated by any one president or premier, they're imposed by those larger forces we discussed earlier. Right now, the binding constraint for both is economic reality. For generations, America could project strength overseas while maintaining prosperity at home. We expanded our military reach, grew generous social programs, and bridged the difference with borrowing. But as I explored in my book How Countries Go Broke, that era has ended. Net interest payments on the U.S. national debt reached nearly $100 trillion in fiscal year 2025, exceeding spending on national defense and becoming one of the largest budget items after Social Security and Medicare. These soaring costs quietly erode flexibility, making it harder to fund the massive, sustained investments needed in industry, infrastructure, defense, and emerging fields like AI leadership, all while managing large deficits and sharp domestic divisions. China contends with its own profound limits. Its population is aging faster than almost any in history, with over 300 million people now above age 60 and projections pushing toward 400 million by 2024, a shift that strains pensions, healthcare, and the workforce. The property sector remains mired in crisis, burdened by heavy debt and ongoing developer struggles, even as major firms like Vank navigate near defaults. Access to cutting-edge Western semiconductors and AI tools is increasingly restricted by export controls, slowing progress in critical technologies. Both nations are formidable, yet both are vulnerable. History teaches that such periods breed instability. Unresolved domestic pressures often spill outward, heightening rivalry, sometimes without deliberate intent. This brings us to the technology force. In past eras, breakthroughs like steam engines, electricity, or early computing defined dominance. Today, artificial intelligence and quantum advances are reshaping power at unprecedented speed, raising the stakes dramatically while shrinking room for missteps. Ongoing restrictions on advanced chips and equipment have limited China's domestic production, but the race intensifies pressure on everyone. We have two armed giants, both resourceful yet constrained, both adapting as the foundation shifts beneath them. The core question isn't if the global order will evolve, it will. It's how. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it echoes familiar patterns. When a rising power challenges an established one, a handful of outcomes recur. Here are the three most likely paths forward. The first scenario, peaceful accommodation. This has been, historically, the least common result, one seen in only a few cases over centuries, like the US overtaking Britain in the late 19th and early 20th centuries through diplomacy and mutual adjustments rather than war. Before we explore those potential futures, we have to grasp the real limits at play. Every great power contest has its main actors and its unbreakable rules. The actors here are the United States and China. Yet the rules aren't set by any individual leader, they're dictated by those five larger forces we talked about earlier. The tightest constraint right now is economic. For decades, America could sustain global leadership while delivering prosperity at home. We built unmatched military strength, expanded vital social safety nets, and covered the difference through borrowing. But as I laid out in my book How Countries Go Broke, that model has hit its ceiling. In fiscal year 2025, net interest payments on the national debt reached around $970 billion, nearly $1 trillion, surpassing defense spending and becoming one of the federal budget's fastest growing burdens, crowding out room for new initiatives. Rivalry with another superpower demands relentless spending on manufacturing, infrastructure security, and cutting-edge fields like AI supremacy. Balancing that against ongoing deficits and deep domestic divides grows ever harder. China grapples with its own profound vulnerabilities. Its population is aging at one of the fastest rates in history, with nearly 300 million people already over age 60 and projections heading toward 400 million by the mid-2030s, putting immense strain on pensions, healthcare, and the labor pool. The property sector remains weighed down by massive debt, with major developers like Vanke narrowly averting defaults in late 2025 amid an ongoing crisis. Access to the most advanced Western chips and AI tools stays heavily curtailed by U.S. export controls, hindering breakthroughs in critical areas. Both countries are powerful, yet both are vulnerable. History tells us these moments breed fragility. When domestic challenges prove stubborn, tensions often spill outward. Sometimes without anyone intending it. That leads us to the technology force. Past eras saw dominance defined by ships, steam power, electricity, or early computers. Now artificial intelligence and quantum systems are reshaping influence at breakneck speed, escalating risks and leaving little room for error. Cooperation isn't impossible, but these dynamics make it far tougher structurally. We're watching two formidable giants, well-armed, tightly constrained, racing to evolve as the terrain shifts underfoot. The real issue isn't whether the global system will transform, it will, it's how. History doesn't replay identically, but it often echoes similar themes. When a rising power tests an established one, only a handful of outcomes recur. Here are the three most credible paths ahead. The first, peaceful accommodation. This has proven across centuries to be the rarest, achieved notably when the United States overtook Britain in the late 19th and early 20th centuries through diplomatic adjustments, economic interdependence, and mutual restraint rather than direct confrontation. Before we examine those potential outcomes, let's first acknowledge the binding limits shaping everything. In any superpower rivalry, there are central actors and overarching rules that no one can rewrite alone. The actors today are the United States and China, but the rules come from those five major forces we've covered, and they're bigger than any policymaker. The most pressing rule right now is economic reality. For many years, America managed to maintain global military dominance while providing strong domestic programs, using borrowing to bridge the difference. But as I detailed in my book How Countries Go Broke, we've exhausted that approach. In fiscal year 2025, the federal government spent $970 billion on net interest payments alone, nearly $1 trillion, surpassing defense spending and ranking as one of the largest budget categories after Social Security and Medicare, steadily crowding out other priorities. Sustaining competition against a peer power demands huge, ongoing commitments to manufacturing, infrastructure, security, and breakthroughs like AI superiority. Achieving that amid chronic deficits and profound political divisions is growing far more challenging. China contends with its own deep-seated challenges. Its population is aging at an extraordinary pace, with nearly 300 million people already over age 60 at the end of 2023 and forecast pointing to over 400 million by the mid-2030s, straining social services, healthcare, and the workforce dramatically. The property market continues to grapple with enormous debt loads, as seen in major developers like Vanke narrowly securing bondholder agreements in late 2025 to extend grace periods and avert immediate defaults amid a prolonged crisis. Access to the most advanced Western semiconductors and AI components remains severely limited by ongoing U.S. export controls impeding progress in vital areas. Both sides are mighty, yet both are stretched thin. History reveals that eras like this breed volatility, stubborn internal issues, stubborn and heightened external frictions, often without clear intent. This leads directly to the technology force. Earlier cycles crowned leaders through mastery of ships, steam power, electricity, or computing. Now, artificial intelligence and quantum capabilities are redefining influence even faster, amplifying consequences and leaving slim margins for mistakes. Collaboration remains feasible, but these pressures make it inherently harder. Picture two powerful giants, heavily equipped, tightly bound, adapting furiously as the landscape shifts. Change isn't in doubt anymore. The global order will evolve. The real question is how. History doesn't copy itself precisely, but it often follows similar rhythms. When an emerging power contests the dominant one, a limited set of results emerges repeatedly. Here are the three most realistic trajectories. The first, peaceful accommodation. This has historically been the scarcest path, one successfully navigated, for instance, when the United States surpassed Britain in the late 19th and early 20th centuries via economic ties, diplomatic flexibility, and shared restraint instead of conflict. It comes down to realizing that lasting stability at this scale demands careful restraint, open channels of communication, built-in safety buffers, and plenty of backup systems. When breakdowns happen on a global level, the fallout touches everyone. No one escapes the shared consequences. So how do you steer your life when the possible futures range from prolonged inflationary fragmentation and economic dislocation on one side to outright catastrophic conflict on the other? I manage investments for clients who can't gamble on blind optimism, and the principles I share with them are the same ones I'd offer anyone facing a shifting landscape. These aren't strict rules, they're timeless guidelines. First, honor the historical cycle. Never expect the world to snap back to the familiar conditions of your early years. Eras of calm and low volatility aren't the default, they're temporary phases in a longer pattern. Accumulating debt, rising internal tensions, and intensifying geopolitical rivalries aren't anomalies, they're built-in elements of human systems recurring across centuries. Second, view diversification as true risk management, not just a bet on growth. In steady times, focusing investments can boost gains. But in turbulent periods, spreading across options builds lasting strength. That means steering clear of over-reliance on any single nation, currency, political framework, or economic approach. Not because any is inevitably failing, but because stress systems can surprise us. Real assets like gold, commodities, or land, scarce and resistant to debasement, have preserved value through past monetary resets and geopolitical upheavals, serving as practical anchors rather than doomsday plays. Third, keep a close eye on domestic cohesion. Experience shows that a nation's outward power often mirrors its inward unity. Deep polarization erodes effective governance, damages trust, and raises the odds of costly missteps. No matter the politics, strong internal harmony doesn't ensure global calm. But widespread division has frequently set the stage for external strife. Pay attention: social cohesion indicators, fiscal health like the U.S. hitting $970 billion in net interest payments for fiscal 2025 alone, and political stability. These often signal trouble before headlines do. Fourth, value flexibility above perfect forecasts. In times like these, the real edge isn't superior prediction, it's quick adaptation. Industries evolve rapidly, skills update, old assumptions fade. People who stay nimble in location, finances, and mindset fare far better through transitions than those locked into one scenario. The cycle itself is neutral, it doesn't judge motives, it simply favors resilience over stubbornness. History doesn't march in perfect lines, it flows through tension, realignment, and rebirth. When you grasp how these systems work under strain, you free yourself from needing guarantees. You focus on readiness, you don't fear shifting winds, you trim your sails accordingly. History isn't destiny, it's a roadmap for handling pressure. And today, the currents are picking up speed. Thank you for coming along on this exploration of our evolving global order. Keep questioning, keep strong, and most importantly, keep adaptable.